Okay, welcome back guys. In this tutorial we're going to be talking about custom video thumbnails. So if we go over to youtube.com and we look at the Phillipians channel, what you'll notice is that all of the videos uploaded as of recent have had custom thumbnails done for them. You can see that there's text on the home screen and it's just a much more inviting video for the consumer to watch. Another thing you'll notice is that there's consistency among all of them. And if we go into our video manager here, you can see it a little bit better because this hasn't updated yet. But there's consistency among all of them, whereas they all have that anamorphic or 2.35 to 1 crop ratio with the black bars on the top and bottom of each video. That consistency is just helpful in making a more appeasing presentation for the viewer, which is what we ultimately want to do. Okay, cool. So let's get into how we make these custom thumbnails. So what we'll do is we'll hop it over, not Spotify, into Premiere. In Premiere, what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to scroll around your video, as you always do, and you'll find a spot where you think you want to have your custom thumbnail happen. So here, my friend Stacy is holding his composition book. And so we want to find a keyframe in this area that we think looks somewhat flattering to our subject. Maybe not something like this where it kind of looks a little ridiculous. We'll find something like that. Maybe, I don't know, if you have more time you can mess around with it. But we'll find something like that that looks a little bit more suitable. If this looks like good composition, then we can just go with this. But as always, we can come into our motion. We can drop down our position keyframe or position elements, and then we can move this. If we drag this, we can move it up and down, so we can recompose this image with inside those crop bars. But I'd say that looks pretty good. We'll leave it at 540. That looks okay. And so then what we'll do is we'll click on this little camera icon here, which is export frame. Also Control-Shift-E to do that the shorthand way. So we can click that. It'll say, do you want to export this? And so we'll rename this to Stacy student teacher. I'm doing test just because this is for you guys. And then we'll export it as a TIFF because that retains the most amount of information. You could export it as a JPEG, but you end up losing information there, and then we obviously don't want a GIF or anything like that. Then you just pick your destination, so we'll just have it go onto my desktop, select that folder, and then import it into project. We don't have to do that because we're going to be editing it in Photoshop. Okay, so there we go. We'll press OK. It'll happen pretty much instantaneously. Close Spotify, and then we can come over here. So here is what we have. These are from earlier because I was actually working on this project earlier. You can do Control-Shift-N to make a new folder on PCs, and then we can just do Charles. I'll hide those for now so that we don't get confused. Okay, but this is the frame that we just exported, and then you can see that we have it here. So what we'll do is we'll right-click on this, we'll say Open With, and then Open with Photoshop. If you just double-click on it, typically it won't open with Photoshop. You'll have a different default program, but if we do that, we can get into Photoshop. Max might be a slightly different procedure, but along the same lines. Okay, so now that we have this in Photoshop, we'll be able to actually do what we want to do. So if we go back here and we look at what we have here, you can see that there's this information which enables the user or the viewer to see what's going on in the video. So here we have the Rhythms of Hope. You have Rhythms of Hope and over dance groups up in the top corner here. It's a little bit hard to see.
Welcome to Phillipian
And so that might be something that we want to change moving forward, making that a little bit easier to read. Another thing you'll notice is that we have text of different sizes and of different kind of shapes. You know, this is a little bit wider, this is a little bit taller. And then we have multiple things going on. So it's an interesting frame combined with dynamic text, and then you have just something that's telling about the video. So we'll come back here into Photoshop and let's try and recreate something like that with this. So we'll go over to our text tool here, and we'll just type out some of our text. We'll probably do all caps. So I'll turn caps lock on. Charles, and then we'll just go back to our pointer tool here. And just so you know, we went down to our text tool here to start typing. It's pretty straightforward. That's basic Photoshop procedure. And then we can resize our text here by clicking on it. If you'll notice that once you have moved around your text and once you're editing it, you can't really click on other things, and that's because you have this layer selected. You'll see it over here, and to put that layer in its place, you simply press enter, and then that layer is kind of set in its place, and then you can click off and do other things, like create another text layer for Stacy. Then we'll go back up here to our pointer tool. We can move this around, and let's say we want to rotate this a little bit. So come off to the side, you'll notice our little pointer changes to a rotation tool, and we can rotate this, say to something like that. And then we're moving back again, so apply the transformation, yes, apply, and so then that looks like that. This Charles, I'm not quite content, so we'll go back here to our layers. These are all the different layers we have in our Photoshop document. We can select Charles, and then we can move this around. Maybe we'll rotate this a little bit. Maybe we'll scale it up a little bit. And that looks okay. We'll press enter to put that in its place. Cool. Now we'll come back down to the bottom here. Oh, really quick, don't worry too much about the font of your text right now. Just get text out there and we can deal with font later. Okay, so we'll come down to the bottom here and we can type in whatever we need on the bottom. So we'll type in something like student feature. And so that'll be text that's telling of whatever the event is. So now that we have this written out, this is way too big, obviously. So what we'll do is we'll come into our text preferences, our character preferences up here in the top corner, character preferences. Then we can select the text, and instead of doing 200 point font, say we'll select that, and we'll do 130. Maybe a little bit less, we'll do 120. Okay, so that's much more reasonable. We can put this in the bottom corner. We can maybe shrink it down that way. Oops, wrong thing. Control Z to undo, or Command Z on a Mac. And then we can put that in its place. So now when we click off this is actually looking okay. Cool. So what else do we want to add to this? Well, let's add maybe one more thing. So Charles Stacy student feature. So far we don't really know a whole lot of what's going on. But say we add one more thing. Composer. So we know Charles is a composer. We could even maybe say music composer if it's unclear, but I think in this case it is okay. So we'll come up here and we'll again make this a little bit smaller. We can maybe do 100 point font on that. Then we can come up here. And so now you want to find some place where it can go. All of this is kind of putting things in places where they make sense. So over here, you had dead space with a water bottle and a piece of paper and a wallet here. And so it's not a lot of, you're not covering up his face. That's number one thing. You don't want to cover up someone's face. But it's a lot of dead space that wasn't being utilized by the shot, so we were able to utilize it with text. So when you look around this, you don't really want to cover the name of the composition. You don't want to cover his face. You could maybe cover his arm or something. You could maybe put this here and make that work somehow. But I think we'll maybe bring this up here, shrink it down a little bit more, rotate it, and boom. In this, we've used a lot of rotation. You don't have to take that route. I don't know, I'd play around a little bit with sizing of stuff, and you can go back and look. Rhythm of Hope, you have different font types for each one. This is pretty straightforward. It's basically just first sports of the year. That was actually in the video, so it wasn't too hard to do. This is actually in the video as well. It wasn't too hard to do. But it's just pulling out those really interesting frames and showcasing that, because that's what's going to draw the viewer in. So if we jump back here really quick, this is looking okay. And so now what we'll talk about is a little bit about fonts. Okay, so there's going to be 3 major fonts that we are going to be using this year in the Phillipian. And let's look at those. Here we go. Fonts. So we're going to be using 3 fonts. I don't know how to pronounce these necessarily, but Bebas Nueve is one of them, with Neo and Code. I like this one a lot. It's one of my favorite fonts. You can see this is what we have going on here. Actually, this is Code. So all of these different fonts you see are the Code bold. But if you see, we can go into, we can come back in here. We can select this text layer, and then we can go into our font, and we can scroll up to Bebas Nueve, and then you can see it has a different look. And so it kind of, you can play around. I personally like this look a fair amount. But let's say we don't want to do it on Charles. We'll go down to Stacy, and then we can apply that there. There it is. So that compressed it a little bit, so maybe we can stretch it out. And then maybe we can even renege on our rotation there. Press enter to confirm, and there you go. We'll maybe align these a little bit closer up to the left-hand side of the screen. It's okay that this is going over a little bit. I think that that will be just fine, and that'll give you a little bit of sense of what we're doing. Cool, so you can click on our background layer and see how it all looks. Actually, I don't really like how this goes over, so we can bring that down, and then we can come over to Stacy and bring that down. You can also hold Shift to select a bunch of different layers at a time, or hold Control to select various layers at a time. So we'll hold Control and select these two, and then we can move Charles Stacy as one element. Control Z to undo. And then also it's important to note, if you do this and then you move it again, and you want to undo multiple steps, in Photoshop it's a little special. You have to do Control Alt Z to undo multiple steps. Okay. Cool. Well, this is actually looking like an okay title. Actually, one more thing we want to change is the student feature. That's a little bit too bold. We want to make this a little bit more subtle in the bottom left-hand corner. So what we'll probably go up to is either Code Light, which is a much subtler version of the font, or we can maybe go into Neo, which is also a good alternative. And so we can maybe look at what that looks like if we press N maybe for Neo. Oops, N, Neo. And so that looks like that. Personally, I prefer Code, so we're going to go back to Code Light. Cool, so there it is. We'll maybe move it up a little bit. So you'll notice that this is snapping between borders. It's sticking onto this bottom edge and sticking onto the corner. If you hold Control, it will no longer do that. So if you want to make very subtle adjustments, you can hold Control and do that. I think Shift does all kinds of crazy things, so don't worry about that. There you go. Okay, so now that we have this thing pretty much finished off, we'll say that this is good for now. Composer, actually, I think we'll change this font a little bit. We'll make this Neo, just so that it's not all the same. Move that off the edge a little bit. Okay, so now that this is all set up, what we're going to do is we're going to first save our work, Control S, and this will say TIFF options, and then these are all pretty much good. Just make sure that you don't have any image compression, because that'll save all of our different layers as individual layers as opposed to compressing them all into one file. Now we'll do Control-Shift-Save, or Control-Shift-S, or we can go up to Save As, and then that'll allow us to save it as a JPEG. So you can click on this Save File Type drop-down, JPEG, and then you can save it as whatever you want. So we'll do Charles Stacy student feature, and then I'll just add on the end JPEG. It's not necessary, but it helps me identify it when I'm looking at the file name. We can name it JPEG, save it again to our desktop because the other one is there as well. Okay, now we can minimize Photoshop, minimize all of our other stuff, and then we have our two files here. This is our test, and you'll notice that this says it's a TIFF file, and then this is our JPEG, and you'll notice that it's a JPEG. Perfect. So now, once we're uploading a video, we can come over to Upload. Select files you'd like to upload. Say, we'll come into our Charles folder, and we'll upload the final Charles video. Now that this video is uploading, what we can do is we can come down to the bottom here where it says Custom Thumbnail. We'll click on Custom Thumbnail, and then we can select, notice we're on our desktop, select our Charles Stacy Student Feature Test JPEG. Open that, it's uploading, and then we'll have a custom thumbnail for our video. As always, when you're uploading a video, make sure that it's uploaded as unlisted so that you don't make any silly mistakes before your videos go live. Okay, well that's how to do a custom thumbnail. If you have any questions, be sure to post them in the comments. One quick thing to note is that when you're making custom thumbnails, once you do your initial upload, it's a weird thing about YouTube. If you try and change that later in time, oftentimes it becomes very difficult to do that. Not necessarily difficult, but it takes a long time for YouTube to update itself. So once you upload a photo as your custom thumbnail, try and make sure that's the one you're going to stick with, because if you need to change it later, sometimes it can take as long as 24 hours to change that on the main video. It'll stay with the old thumbnail. Okay, well that's about it. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next video.